Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. I'm TCaptainX. If you're a mouse and keyboard player playing in Call of Duty Black Ops 6 and you're looking to improve your gameplay, especially related to your aim and movement, then this video is for you. We're gonna do a deep dive on your settings, especially things like sensitivity and movement settings, and then give you some tips on how to practice and improve your aim and movement, including a Aimlabs warm-up that I try to do before every time I play. Now, before we even jump into the game settings, I wanna cover a very important point that some mouse and key players just don't fully understand, but it's incredibly important too. That is DPI. Mouse DPI, or dots per inch, is essentially the sensitivity of your mouse itself in direct relation to your PC, separate from the game you're playing. The lower the DPI, the slower the sensitivity, or the more you have to move your mouse around, and the higher the DPI will be a faster sense, or moving your mouse less. DPI is then multiplied by your game sensitivity to get your eDPI, or effective DPI, and that is actually what your sensitivity is. So for example, a DPI of 800 times 4 game sensitivity equals 3200 eDPI. But a DPI of 1600 times 2 game sense is also 3200 eDPI. So that means if you were to sat down at a computer with setting 1s versus setting 2, it's gonna feel the exact same, and you basically wouldn't be able to tell the difference unless you tapped out of the game and were like going through the menus. Then the DPI would be the only thing that gives you a difference, and one would feel faster or slower. Now, if you have no idea how to change the DPI on your mouse, most mice have a button on the top here that you can hit and you can cycle through different DPI. You have to look at kind of your instructions of that mouse, and it will tell you what each button is set to. Or you might have a actual driver software like Logitech or Crosshair where you can go in and manually change it in there yourself. But is there a best DPI to use? Well, some people a lot smarter than me have done some testing and basically found that the higher your DPI is, the less input latency there is, or the less lag you have in your mouse. In summary, they found that anything above 1600 DPI or more is basically the lowest latency you're gonna get. But let's say you've been playing on 800 DPI, which is a very popular one. The difference from the lag in 800 to 1600 DPI is so small, you're probably not even gonna notice it, so I wouldn't really bother. But I would definitely recommend you don't play on ultra low DPIs like 100, 200, and probably even higher than 400 as well. But if you want to absolutely maximize this, then I would recommend changing your DPI to 1600 or higher, and then adjusting your game sense accordingly to get that same eDPI that you were on before. So knowing that, is there a best eDPI when it comes to Call of Duty? Short answer is no, but there's definitely a Goldilocks zone where most high skilled players tend to be. So let's compare some popular and highly skilled mouse and keyboard players to see what they're playing on. One of the most popular Warzone mouse and keyboard players is Metaphor, who had by far the most kills of all Warzone players for MW3 Warzone. His eDPI is 5700, which we then can convert to something known as centimeters per 360. And that's just an easier way to visualize it. And for Metaphor, that is 24 centimeters per 360. So that just means if I was on his sensitivity, if I moved my mouse 24 centimeters laterally, I would turn around and do a 360. I'm playing on a much slower sensitivity at 49 centimeters per 360 though. Another highly skilled player who's very well known for his amazing aim is Strafe, who plays at a similar centimeters per 360 of 25.5. One of the best competitive Warzone players on mouse and key is Breadman, who is at 45 centimeters per 360. Both Huskers and Blue are at 43 centimeters per 360. Then, like I said, there's me, who's at 49. Now, a big mistake that many kind of newer, less experienced mouse and key players play at is that they are using a way too fast or too high sensitivity, like in the ballpark of 15 centimeters per 360 or less. And that would mean a simple small flick of the wrist would result in them completely turning around, and there is just no way you can be accurate, line up far shots, or track people with that fast of a sensitivity. I think the majority of players would do well in the ballpark of 20 to 30 centimeters per 360. But if you have the desk space and you can get used to arm aiming and not just wrist aiming, especially if you plan to play Warzone as well with the longer health pool and more tracking required, slower sensitivities in the range of 30 to 50 centimeters are gonna be much more ideal. Now, I have seen a few people that play very well at ultra low sensitivity, like in the range of 50 to 70 centimeters, but very fast flicks and changes of direction can be pretty difficult, especially in close quarters, because you're gonna have to swipe your whole arm, possibly multiple times in order to completely change directions. Now, at the end of this video, I'm gonna give you guys a few tips if you're wanting to change your sense, especially to a slower sensitivity, and how you can help learn that arm aiming aspect. I wish I could tell you guys, use this sense, it's the best, but that's just not how it is, because it depends on so many different things about yourself. Now, if you're clueless and you're like, TCap, I don't know what to do, just tell me, I would probably say 30 centimeters per 360 is a great place to start. So at 1600 DPI, that'll be 2.85 game sensitivity. So for myself, I'm actually at 1.77 mouse or in-game sensitivity with a 1600 DPI here. Now, under the show more, we don't really need to adjust any of these settings here, but an incredibly important setting is going to be our ADS sensitivity multiplier. So this is when you hold right click and aim your gun. Does your sensitivity stay the same, or does it get slower if we set that value less than 1? It seems like the majority of top players keep this setting 1 to 1, and I do as well. And the benefit of this is that you don't have to basically learn two different sensitivities. Your hip fire and your ADS sense, they're going to be the same. But there are plenty of people that do play at a slightly slower or lower ADS sensitivity. For example, Breadman plays at 0.85. So that just means when he aims his gun, his aim is about 85% instead of 100% for his hip fire. Now, if you're new and you have no idea, I think anywhere between 1 and 0.75 is fine. But if you really don't know, just stick to 1, because that means you only have to have one sensitivity to learn, and you don't have to worry about your hip fire sense versus your ADS sense. So continuing to move on here in the rest of our settings here, look inversion is where you like go up to go down and down to up. It's kind of like the airplane settings. If you're someone that, if you're probably older, I'm gonna guess you're older the age of 50, you might like this, but most people, you're gonna wanna keep this on standard. We're gonna keep both these presets off. So now let's click on the mouse advanced settings. First, with custom sensitivity per zoom. If you want, you can actually set different sensitivities for different zoom optics. So some people I've seen with like certain higher zoom optics, it feels too fast or too slow for them, and they'll go in there and adjust that. Personally, I don't like to overcomplicate things, and I just keep this off, but you are welcome to do that if it's something you prefer. Now, ADS sensitivity transition timing is a bit important. The one that I do not recommend using is after zoom. If your ADS sense is on 1, this basically doesn't really matter. But if you use an ADS sense other than 1, this will matter. And what this means is gradual would mean that as we aim our gun in, it's going to slowly apply that new ADS sensitivity multiplier. And then instant would be the moment we press right click, that's going to take into effect. Again, it doesn't matter if your ADS sense is 1, and it's not gonna matter much on 1x optics, but on higher zoom optics, you will feel that as you're zooming in. So again, kind of personal preference, but I'm gonna go with gradual. Okay, ADS sensitivity type. This one is a little bit of a confusing setting, and I'm gonna do my best to explain it. I would say from looking at other people, a lot of the higher sensitivity players seems like they play on legacy, but then lower sense players like myself tend to play on relative. But I don't know if there's a perfect answer to which one is better. Relative, what it's gonna do here is when you zoom in your gun, it's going to try to adjust your sensitivity to your zoom level to match based off your monitor distant coefficient setting. So what that means is that when I aim my gun, technically my even though I'm on affected field of view, notice how I zoom in a little bit. Even though this is a 1x optic, I'm still zooming in on my gun. So this is going to adjust your sensitivity to try to make it feel the same so that you're covering the same amount of pixels on your screen based off the size of your monitor. Legacy, however, kind of throws out the whole monitor distant coefficient thing, and it bases it off the field of view. Now, what I notice about Legacy is that when I aim my gun, my sensitivity feels too fast. It feels faster when I aim in, whereas relative, it seems like it slows down my sense just a tad more. If you've been playing on one setting for a while, I would just stick there. If you're new, I would say if you're lower sense, go relative. If you're higher sense, go legacy. But I really don't think there is a right answer here. It just simply comes down to preference. Now, for our monitor distant coefficient, the default is going to be 1.33, but that is actually going to be wrong for most monitors. So to find this, it's really easy. You need to take the horizontal resolution of your monitor and divide it by your vertical. So if you're on a standard 1920 by 1080. 1920 divided by 1080 equals 1.78. And that has to do because it is a 16:9 ratio monitor size. For myself, I play on a 2K monitor, but it is still a 16:9. So I think that's what, 2560 divided by 1440, I think, if I remember that. And that is still 1.78. Now, if you're on like a weird ultra wide monitor, then this number is going to be a little bit different and probably a higher number. Opening up the mouse calibration tab here, make sure all of the acceleration, filtering, smoothing, all of this is off. You do not want to mess with this. It's going to make your sense feel really weird and awkward, and it kind of like throws out muscle memory. Mouse wheel delay, you might want to turn this down a little bit. That way it's easy to go up and down with your scroll wheel if you use that, but it's not going to be super slow, or if you go to 0, it could like accidentally do too many inputs. So I normally keep mine really low, like 50 or 100. Okay, moving over to the keybinds tab here. One thing that I want to say is I have incredibly awkward keybinds. I would not really recommend copying my keybinds, in all honesty. I don't think the default keybinds are wrong by any mean, and a lot of it just depends on if you've played other games in the past of what you're used to. I have the goofiest ones. It's from playing Fortnite way back in the day, and like by build settings and everything. Like, for example, I literally use caps lock to reload. I know that's so cringe and people hate that, but like I said, don't copy my keyboard settings. I'm gonna scroll through things really quick to show you and point out a few things, but yeah. Now, it is very important that you have a separate prone dive keybind from your crouch slide. This makes diving, proning just way faster and efficient. And then you can just leave the chain stance one blank. Moving on to my movement advanced keybinds. I haven't really messed with a lot of these. I think I've left all of those default. Combat keybinds here. Like I said, I use caps to reload and R for next weapon. Some really goofy settings, but it is what I do. Looks like I need to add that one actually. And I use X to interact. Again, E or F is going to be more standard for most people. Combat advanced keybinds here. You can add a dedicated melee keybind where you can pull out your melee weapon without having to hold your melee button. So that is nice to add. And then the rest of my keybinds down here, overlay advanced. I don't think I've messed with a lot of this here. And that is going to be the rest of my keybinds. All right, moving on to movement settings. So sprint assist, they've changed how this works from previous CODs, or changed kind of the wording of it. Essentially, tactical sprint assist is auto tac sprint. So what this means is that if I just press my W key, I'm gonna get straight into my tactical sprint, which is my fastest sprint, where your guy is actually like running as fast as he can. Now, if you use shotguns a lot, this can be a little bit awkward because it messes with that sprintifier. Now, if I turn this off, hitting W key will just walk, and then I hit my sprint button to get into my sprint. Depending on how you have another setting will depend if you have to hit sprint once or twice to get into your tac sprint. And then on would be W will put you into a regular sprint, and then hitting your sprint button again gets you into a tactical sprint. So this is a good in between if you like shotguns, but you still want to have good movement and not have to worry about hitting your sprint button too much. But personally, I like tactical sprint assist on because it's just the easiest for very fast and more fluid movement. One thing you do want to make sure you do is, if you're going to do that, is make sure you turn the sprint assist delay all the way down to 0, or it's going to make things just really awkward and clunky. And then I would recommend leaving your assist sideways and backwards on, because that is just going to help you get right into a sprint when you go sideways or backwards without having to hit your sprint key. So if we put this on low mantle assist, if I just W key without pressing anything, I'm gonna mantle and walk right over this. The problem with this is the amount of times where I'm trying to get close to cover to like get up against a wall, and then I accidentally mantle up, and then I'm just in the middle of the open and get fried and I'm out of cover, happens too much for me. So if you do want it on, I would keep it to low and definitely not on, because you will accidentally mantle and climb on things way too much. But I would say put it on off is gonna be best, and then just spam jump when you want to mantle onto something. Now, you can get more involved in here and do for like sideways, off, all that. If you are going to leave it on, definitely make sure this is on tight and not loose, or again, you're going to just be mantling on things when you don't want to. Crouch assist is a new setting, and it's kind of cool here. I'll show you what it does. So if there's an object that you wouldn't be able to walk forward into, if you have crouch assist on, your guy will automatically crouch or slide into it without having to actually press your crouch button. I don't think it's that important, but if you want to make it easier to move around, I don't think this one's going to bother you and accidentally do things you don't want to do, like the mantle assist would. So I think you're perfectly fine to leave that setting on, but personally, I'm going to leave it off. You can also set it to only go on when you're tactical sprinting, so that's another option as well. Okay, corner slicing is an interesting one. This is kind of that Rainbow Six Siege mechanic where you peek out, where you like bob and lean out at the side. I personally like this, and I believe this will give you a slight advantage to peeking out and getting more cover. I was told, I believe it was Exclusive Ace did a video saying that from the enemy point of view, they don't really see much of a difference here, but this doesn't bother me. But if that leaning does bother you, no problem. I think you can just turn that off and call it a day, and it's perfectly fine. All right, for our movement behaviors, I'd recommend you leave all of these on toggle. If you like hold, that's fine, but that just means you have to continue to hold the button, and then go to can get kind of awkward. Same with prone, sprint. Again, I think this one you can do hold, where you have to hold your sprint button, but I just like to toggle it so I don't have to keep my hand on my sprint key. Parachute behavior, I have this off. This will matter more for Warzone. Unless you splat a lot, you might want to leave that on. Sprint restore and side maintain sprint, make sure these are on. So sprint restore means that as soon as I run out of my tactical sprint, now I'm in my regular sprint. If I just keep sprinting and I don't press any buttons, I will automatically go back to my tactical sprint once it is refreshed. And then slide maintain sprint makes it much easier to slide cancel. So if I'm sprinting, I hit slide and I just hold the W key, I will get right back into a sprint without having to press any buttons. If I turn this off, when I slide and continue to hit W key, I will walk in a crouch unless I hit my sprint key again. So I would have to slide and then sprint, or slide and hit the jump button to get back into it. And it just makes your slide cancels not as fluid and adds unnecessary buttons. So I'd recommend keeping that on. Mantle cancels reload. I like to leave this off. This will cancel your reload if you start to mantle over something. Movement advanced settings here. Make sure again, the grounded mantle, I would keep this off. Same as all of the other mantle settings, unless you really prefer that. Walk behavior and walk speed doesn't really matter too much in terms of Black Ops 6 or for Warzone. Slide dive activation, I would highly recommend you do independent and not shared. This means you have an independent key for diving and for sliding. It does mean you have to have two separate keybinds, but it makes both of these much easier and faster to do, and you can be more intentional for when you want to do one or the other. Now, if from earlier you didn't like having that tactical sprint assist on or auto tac sprint, what I would say is if you're going to play with it off or just to on, is change this tactical sprint activation to single tap run, because what that means is if it's off, you only have to sprint hit your sprint key once and you'll get straight into attack sprint instead of having to hit it twice to get into attack sprint. Plunging underwater, free just means if you look down, you will go underwater, whereas trigger means you have to hit, I believe, your sprint button in order to go underwater. So I think it's kind of personal preference. Sprinting door bash, I would definitely leave this on. This means if you sprint through a closed door, it will open it. If it's off, you have to actually hit your interact button to open the door. And then I'm gonna be honest, I don't even know what change camera side activation does. This might be for third person settings, I think. All right, moving on to the combat tab. Aim down sight behavior, definitely recommend keeping this on hold. Toggle would be just a little bit awkward. Interact behavior, just press is fine. The dedicated melee weapon activation is hold melee. So if you hold your melee button, you will pull out your knife button. For me, that is F, and then you can get faster movement speed. But I also have a keybind. So 1, I believe it is for me, is going to also bring that out. Either or, you can do both of them at the same time if you want. Equipment behavior, I definitely prefer hold, but toggle is fine as well. What hold does is if I hold my lethal button, as soon as I let it go, I will then throw it. Whereas toggle would be I would hit it once, he would bring it out, and then I would hit it again and he would throw it. For weapon mount activation, this is just how you get mounted. I have a dedicated keybind for me, which is gonna be Z, and I toggle it. So I hit it once, I mount, but you can also do double tap ADS, or you can do ADS plus melee. Either of these are fine, but just make sure you do not do ADS because that's gonna be super awkward because you're gonna accidentally mount all the time. Going into the combat advanced settings here, weapon mount exit, keep this on short because instant can be a little bit buggy there. Interact reload behavior, I don't see why this setting is in here. This should be a controller setting, but I would do prioritize interact especially if you're going to play Warzone or zombies, because that makes looting generally easier. Focus behavior, I like to change this one to toggle. So if you have a big optic that you can hold your breath on, you have to only hit your button once to hold your breath, whereas hold, you have to hold that button to keep holding your breath. Sprint cancels reload, I like to keep this one off because some guns get a little bit buggy and they will just mess things up, and you will basically have to stand still or your guy will reload if you have that tactical sprint assist on. Depleted ammo weapon switch, I like to leave this one off because I will accidentally switch through my weapon. So when you run out of ammo, it'll automatically switch for you. Most people can leave that on, that's fine, but I just prefer it off. Armor plate behavior doesn't really matter in Black Ops 6, but apply all is definitely easiest. C4 detonation, all at once is generally fine, unless you want to get crazy and do one by one for some reason. Body shield finishing move behavior, I like to actually do prioritize body shield, because what this does is if you hold your melee button behind someone, it'll take you straight to that body shield mechanic where you can hold them hostage. If not, if you leave it on prioritize finishing move, you have to double tap to do the finishing move. And then manual fire behavior, again, we want to make sure this one is on press, assuming you have a decent trigger finger. But if you have a really slow trigger finger, you can put this on hold, and you can just hold down the left click and you automatically will shoot a semi-auto or burst gun, but it's going to be a lot slower than what you could do it. And then going over to our graphics tab in the view tab here, make sure we turn our field of view up. This is completely personal preference, but I think most people at least above 100, ideally 110 or greater. If we lower this setting here a bunch, this zooms everything in and it actually gives us more visual recoil. It will make targets appear closer and larger because we're zoomed in, but we have a smaller peripheral vision. Whereas if I crank this back to 120, I can see so much farther. Targets will appear smaller, but I now have less visual recoil because I'm farther away from my gun. And then for our ADS field of view, I would generally recommend affected for most people, because that's gonna keep that zoom out effect when we aim in. But some people do like independent, especially on mouse and keyboard. And that is gonna have a wide field of view here, but when we zoom way in. Even though this is a 1x optic, it's gonna zoom in like we had a much narrower field of view. So this makes it easier if you struggle to see enemies, especially at mid to long range. But I will say the vast amount of top players do play on affected. And then all the other field of views, I would keep these to wide or the largest setting. Make sure all of our motion blurs are off and our camera movements are set to least to kind of minimize that unnecessary movement. In our interface tab under gameplay HUD, make sure your minimap rotation, or I'm sorry, your minimap shape is set to square, as this will actually make it slightly larger. And then for our crosshair, definitely make sure this is on, but for show more, I like to actually turn mine to larger or even largest, and that will make it so that your center dot is just very large, and it really helps you visualize your centering so that as you're coming around corners, you can really focus on having your crosshair in a good spot. And then you also probably notice that my crosshair color is a different color. This is a new setting, which I absolutely love. If you're gonna change this away from white, I would recommend you stick to a very bright color, like a bright green, bright blue, or maybe like a pink. The yellows, oranges, and reds might blend in with the environment, so just be careful about what color you use. All right, if you went through this video and you change some settings, or you just want to work on your aim, practice some stuff, a really great way to do this in a very low pressure environment is go to find a match, click on private match, and then we're going to create one. For your classes, make sure you set up something with larger magazines, and make sure you have the overkill perk so you have multiple guns to kind of play around with. And then in the game setup tab here, go to mode, change it to free for all. For the map, if you want to work on more kind of close to mid-range engagements and get like the most action and practice, Babylon's probably your best bet here. But if you want to work on longer range engagements, especially sniping, I think Rewind or Scud might be some decent options as well. And then in the game rules tab here, turn your time limit up and your score limit up to basically as much as you would like to do. You can turn the match start time down. In the player tab here, if you want to just kind of practice and make it the same as multiplayer, just leave it on as 100. But if you want to really work on your tracking a bit more, you can turn the health up some. Now 300 is going to be like what Warzone health would be. That might be too much for what we need to practice on. I would say somewhere in the ballpark of like just doubling it to 200 would be really good, just so we have to practice and track more accurately. If you want, you can turn health regen up fast as well. You can turn your radar always on if you'd like. And then in the gameplay here, generally turn score streaks off, and if you really want, you can turn health steal on as well, which when you shoot, you basically get health back. And then over to the right here, click the plus button, and we're gonna add some bots here. If you're brand new, you just wanna kind of work on new sensitivity, new settings, leave it on recruit, but I like to go up to regular because they move around a little bit more, forcing you to kind of track more, and then we can start the game. Now, once we're in here, we can basically go around and we can practice movement, we can practice aim, and especially with the new Omni movement, try to work on some of those different techniques like sliding sideways, sliding backwards. Going backwards can be a little bit awkward for mouse and key players, and this is just a great way to do a quick warm-up, or especially if you're learning new keybinds. And sometimes I'll do this as a quick warm-up, or I'm going to show you guys what I do as my Aimlab warm-up here in just a second. All right, so we're on Aimlab. If you're unfamiliar with this is a free aim trainer game. It's available on Steam. Like I said, it is totally free to play. So I have a TCaptainX BO6 warm-up. I will publish this, and hopefully the search mechanism will work, so you can just search it up. But if not, you can very easily create this playlist yourself by going into custom, create a playlist, and then you just make one here. I will say, if you're having trouble adding things, make sure you go down to the bottom when you're in the crate and click custom, and then it will tend to find different scenarios better, but the search mechanism is a little bit goofy in this. So there's 6 different scenarios. This should take you basically 6 minutes because each scenario is 1 minute. So the first one, 6-shot, is just meant to be as kind of like your initial warm-up, just to practice those kind of more precise aiming. Make sure when you're doing this that you're going more for accuracy and not so much for speed. The next one, reflex shot, is really good at working on your flicks. So every time, try to bring your aim back to the center and then flick quickly to whichever it is. And again, try to take your time and be a little bit more about accuracy than purely speed here. Sphere track 90 is one of my favorite just overall tracking warm-ups. Just really helps promote that smooth tracking. Next, we're going to RA head click. This is a little bit more difficult of a task for some people. This is a more dynamic clicking exercise, meaning the targets are moving and we're having to click on these very small targets. Very good for improving things like sniping and more long range shots like that. RA 180 regen Warzone. This is much better for Warzone, but it's going to definitely help you for Black Ops 6 multiplayer as well. A much harder but very good tracking exercise to work on for more close to mid-range engagements. And then finally, smoothness switching 360. More of a switching exercise that works on both tracking and flicking at the same time. I do have a TCaptainX Warzone playlist here, which I'll show here on screen. You should be able to search this. This is a much longer playlist if you really want to put some time in and practice. Really, when it comes to aim training, if you can just do it for like 10 minutes a day before you jump on, that is probably all you need. But every once in a while, if you want to really put in some time and focus on some of these things, especially if you're a Warzone player and you want to try to compete with the tracking compared to controller players, this is a really good thing to put some time into. I will say though, this might be the year that mouse and key has a better chance against controller, just since the fact that aim assist was nerfed slightly. I do play both inputs, so if you come over, you check out my stream on YouTube or Twitch, you'll probably see I might be playing controller or mouse and key. And then also there's a little bit less visual recoil in this game, so it's easier to see what we're shooting at, which is great for people that play mouse and key. Also, if you're trying to adjust to a much lower or slower sensitivity where you have to use your arm more, a tip that I would give is either in Aimlab or when you're fighting against like the bots in a private match or even zombies, turn your sensitivity even slower than you would. So let's say you want to play at 40 centimeters per 360, but that feels really slow to you. Put it even slower, like 60 centimeters, like 1.5 slower of your sensitivity. And it's gonna feel so awkward, but play on that, get a few kills on it, don't play too much, and then go back to your normal sense, and then all of a sudden, that sense will feel fast to you, and it basically forces you to learn how to arm aim. One other thing I'll say that's a good idea is that you can also go practice in zombies. Since zombies is just kind of a lower pressure environment, if you want to still like play the game and level up your guns and stuff, just go play a bunch of zombies. It's gonna be a lot easier for you to, just practice and get the use of like a new sensitivity, new keybinds, whatever that may be in a lower pressure environment like zombies. So guys, I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. We do lots of more informational videos like this. If you're wanting more of maybe a detailed Aimlabs video, let me know. I can possibly look into doing that. But otherwise, I appreciate you guys, and we will see you in the next one.